Apologize again for the technical difficulties. We are having a major storm here in Nashville. My hair was curly at the beginning of this episode, just to show you how bad it is. But we apologize for that, and hopefully tomorrow we do have better weather expected. We have a couple of questions from the viewers, and if you subscribed, we are getting your questions and comments, and we appreciate them. So, you mind a couple of questions?
Not at all.
They're mostly for you.
Okay. What do we got?
Okay. So the first question is, how is it possible that companies determined to be criminal corporations and find billions of their dollars due to the extent of their criminality were chosen by our government to develop and oversee emergency use inoculations to be injected into millions of healthy people?
Oh, that's such a good question. It's near and dear to my heart. The number one thing, if I could wave my magic wand and our country gets better, is to have accountability again. Now, you and I, we face accountability because we're down here in the trenches where, you know, if you get a speeding ticket, it matters, and, you know, if you don't pay your taxes, it matters. But at that level, I think the spirit of that question is, why don't these big companies get in trouble? And there's no good answer for that, but it starts here. It begins with citizens saying enough. We don't consent to this anymore, and I think we have to ask for accountability to finally land back where it belongs.
By accountability, do you mean the vaccine manufacturers being able to be sued again?
Well, I'm a pretty absolutist about this. I figure that above a certain level of crime, if a company commits it, it ought to suffer the death penalty like a human, right? Just out of business. And so there are certain crimes that this person is referring to that are pretty horrendous when you study them. To me, I'm of this mind where if a company has done something really, really heinous, I don't trust them again. It's just how I'm built.
Yeah.
Right? So the question is, why aren't these companies getting in trouble? And I don't mean civil, right? Civil fines are one thing. That's sort of a cost of business for these companies. I mean criminal. That's what you need, I think.
That might be the incentive to actually
Yeah, you show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome. When people get let off to jail, they change their behavior.
Right, they would, or even the perceived that they might end up in jail would maybe stop them from doing it in the first place.
Right, yeah. Good question.
Another question. What about the $1 billion Biden paid to mainstream media to speak from its one theme script and censor any scientists or doctors who had concerns about that position?
Yeah, censorship also near and dear to my heart. So these are really good questions. And can I just say I was a little offended that some of that money went to TikTok stars?
Yes,
Because this was so they for people who don't know, they were running an influencer campaign to try and get people to accept the vaccines, right? So it was really think about this. If you're a pharma company, to advertise on TV, you have to put up, remember, you've seen those, like there's that big box of like side effects, you know, you may experience weight loss, hair loss, you know, blah, 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 right? They get around that when the government's doing the advertising for them. They don't have to put up any sort of safety disclaimer. So think back, if you've ever seen a vaccine ad on the TV, you probably haven't heard any safety warning whatsoever. And the reason for that is because of that person's pointing out, which is it's an end run. So think about the government gives the pharma companies full liability protection, gives them enforced mandated profits because they have to buy this from them, and then runs the ads for them so they don't have to talk about any potential side effects, and then incentivizes TikTok stars to make it all seem like this is perfectly normal. It's not. This is not normal.
That's what I've learned new today. That's unbelievable. I didn't know they, you know, that's just horrendous. So TikTok stars are now informing us about our health decisions.
Yes, but without having to tell us about any possible, you know,
Right,
side effects.
without complete informed consent.
Exactly.
Okay, another question we have. Can Dr. Martinson confirm to the jury that in 2020 a study showed that a high proportion of people hospitalized with COVID had a vitamin D deficiency? This is from Robin in Quebec City, Canada.
Robin, great question. I did many episodes on this. So when I said what the CDC should have done, every patient should have come into the hospital and they should have taken their vitals and drawn 7 vials of blood and asked some questions. And one of the things that emerged very early on was that for people who had vitamin D levels below a certain level in their serum, they had a much higher chance of ending up in the ICU or dying. The magic cutoff number is 50 nanograms per ml. It's a vitamin D level. You can get a test for it. The doctor draws your blood. If you're above 50, pretty much your chance of getting anything bad from COVID dropped to close to zero for most people. So we had this information. It first emerged in maybe April of 2020. By May, I was screaming. I was like, why don't we have a national vitamin D program? And think about this one simple thing. It's very simple. Why didn't I wake up one day, open my mailbox, and find a package of vitamin D from the HHS? It should have been there. We had that data. And other countries did that, and did that well, and we saw European countries do this. To this day, we still don't have a vitamin D policy. If you go, just yesterday, you can go to the NIH, look at their treatment guidelines, and they say what they do and don't support for COVID. They still say under vitamin D, not enough information exists to either recommend for or against. We have dozens of randomized controlled trials. We have as much evidence as you could ever want, but even if it was just iffy evidence, the cost of taking vitamin D, very tiny in dollar terms, no downside, it has no toxicity, but if the upside is not dying, this is a very asymmetrical, this is a no-brainer. That's how it should have been. The only time I heard Anthony Fauci talk about vitamin D, he was on Jennifer Garner's vlog. He was probably a little starstruck because he does have he likes the attention. And she asked him, "Hey, what are you taking?" He said, "Oh, I'm taking vitamin D," like he said it.
Yes.
But he never said it from his bully pulpit to recommend it more widely.
He said it casually. Didn't he say he takes 8,000 IUs a day?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
that's
what he does.
because she's really cute. That's why he said it. That's why he said it.
You know, that it's literally, that is to me one of the more smoking gun crimes that we have. Just that one thing. If you could focus on that one piece of evidence, we don't have a vitamin D policy, and we never shipped it to people. In particular, why didn't we even just ship it to people in old folks' homes? They're out of the sun, typically. They have very poor vitamin D manufacturing in their bodies above a certain age. It would have been a very simple, very easy thing to do. And that is a national tragedy.
Well, it's other countries sent things out to their citizens. I remember India in particular sent out packages to a lot of their citizens that helped.
They did. They sent this blister pack out, and it had 5 things in it. And vitamin D was one of those things. And there were 2 60,000 unit tabs, so they just want to load you up, right? So they sent that out. It also included ivermectin, included vitamin C, it included doxycycline typically, and zinc. So that was the 5-pack right there, and it was they've had remarkable success with it.
Yeah, so we, as you said, we could have done that really easily.
It cost them about $1.73 a package to make
They
these.
could have taken some of that advertising money that they spent to advertise everything.
How many of those packages could you buy for $1 billion?
That would have been easy.
Too easy.
Okay, so she had Robin has a follow-up question too. She says back in the beginning of 2020, do we know about the other type of rapid test that would have actually been good at determining if someone was COVID positive? Why did they choose the RT-PCR test?
Well, at first we didn't actually have, it takes time to develop these tests. A much better one would be a rapid test. So here would be the best one, not one that you have to go to a special place and roll your window down and get something shoved up your nose and wait 24 hours. The best thing would be something that's in your home. You feel a little sick, you take it like the ones we have now. Put a little saliva in, you wait to see if the lines develop. That's that's called an antigen test. That's different. That's testing if you have antigens, your body has started to produce an antibody response to COVID. That's a very good indicator that you are actually at that moment, you have virus in you. Or the kits actually have the antibody in it and they're trying to detect if they can detect the virus. That's even better. So those are the best ones. And then you have instant information, you get to know. Those would have been fantastic as well. I think we would have had those mid-2020.
A lot earlier than we do now. Let's see. There's here is more. It seems more of a comment. Someone said, "I hope you mentioned somehow the fact that children are not affected as much by COVID-19," which you had said, because children lack the ACE2 inhibitors in their noses. They cannot pick up the virus, and the CDC knew almost right away, probably before, because they were researching 3 different kinds of HCOV that were circulating in 2014. They said they were personally screened for the disease in 2014 in a local emergency room.
Yeah, here's the thing. We know a lot about the coronaviruses, and so there's a whole sordid history there about where this one came from, and I hope we get to that at some point. But based on that earlier knowledge, we actually had, here's interesting, so we had this thing called SARS came out in 2002, classic SARS, right? Classic, we had classic SARS, it came and it went. And in that, I can show you a paper from 2005, which from the NIH, saying that hydroxychloroquine was a potent inhibitor of that virus in their cell model systems. So we had that early information early on about how to deal with SARS itself, right? And there were a number of other early treatments in there. Again, whether or not that would have been the best one, we found other things now that I think are even better that have floated to the top of the list. There's really good things, but the point is, what we should have done was taken all of the knowledge we had, put our best and our brightest against it, incentivized them, said, hey, there's $100 million for whoever figures out the best combination of things, right? And trust me, it would have found it out in like a week, right? It would have been amazing. But we didn't do that, again.
Yeah.
In fact, those were mostly blocked for various reasons.
For some reason, or censored at the very least. We have one from Ashley in South Carolina. Each expert, how long they feel that COVID was known about by Fauci before the first case was diagnosed, and is it safe to say that graphene oxide in the vaccine or boosters compiled with your bloodstream and cells?
What was the first part of that question?
She's saying, I know sometimes these text messages are difficult. She's saying, how long do you feel that they know, I'm paraphrasing for her, that COVID was known by Fauci before the first case was diagnosed? Is the first one.
Yeah, I think we'll get into that more as the time goes on.
Okay.
But there's a lot of debate about this. When is that first case? So we all saw the movie Contagion, right? It's an amazing thing. And what did they want to find more than anything? Patient zero, right? You need to know patient zero. That's the first thing of virology. It's like, you got to find out, because if patient zero turns out to be a guy who lives with 400 parrots, you're like, maybe it's parrots, right? It gives you vital information about where this came
Starting
from.
point, yeah.
And then once you have that earliest case with no mutations, then you can start to track the mutations out, and you can figure out, well, who did they go in touch with? Who were they around? And you can start to develop a sense of how easily transmissible this is and how mutagenic it is. All critical information, and nobody seemed to care. There's been zero effort to find out who patient zero is, and I suspect that's because they already know the answer, which is patient zero didn't come from a village in the jungle. Patient zero came from some other place, like a lab. I think that's the issue that's sort of at that. But that's a tell in this situation. What do people do? What do they not do? It's kind of like that Arthur Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes, about the case of the dog that did not bark. Right? That was the vital clue. When they stopped looking for patient zero within a month, I was like, that dog isn't barking. Right? I knew something was wrong.
Something was wrong.
At that point in time.
Okay, let's see this other question she asked. Is it safe to say that graphene oxide in the vaccines compiled with the vaccines and boosters compiled within your bloodstream and cells?
I don't have any data to support the graphene oxide at this point.
Okay, yeah, that has been something that's been going around, but it's good that you say that. So matter of fact, because sometimes people just badmouth something and they don't say that they don't know. You know, so it's just, okay. Let me see. We have some other ones. Okay, we did that one. So go back to let's see. There was an interesting one. Okay. I'm trying to find, there was an interesting one from an FBI guy that was coming out specifically about him shining a light on things. Okay.
I'm glad you have so many to dig through.
I know that, but I'm just, you have to, I'm trying to get the good ones. Okay. Could you confirm that 100% that the RT-PCR is not available to differentiate between COVID and influenza? What is your opinion on the impact of COVID death statistics?
So that's a fairly easy one to get to. So these PCR tests are highly, highly specific. So it can't differentiate between COVID and the flu because it can't detect flu.
Okay.
It's not.
Or was it meant to?
It wasn't meant to.
All right.
It would hopefully come up negative every single time. Somebody could have full-blown flu and you give them the RT-PCR for COVID, and it should come up negative, right? Because it's not designed to test for that. The key is all wrong for the lock. So that's actually, but flu went away for a couple of years there.
Magically.
Right? It went away. And there's some theories around that. And one is called viral interference. And it looks like sometimes one virus is just like, no, it's my turn, you know?
They overpower.
And they overpower the other ones out there. So Jennifer, I think that's probably what was going on, but it still is very murky. We don't have good data. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and even the person that invented the PCR test, didn't they say that this was not meant to detect a virus?
It would be very bad as a diagnostic for the reasons we were talking about earlier. It's just, it's very finicky test. It would be very hard to calibrate it against, because you don't care that, you don't want to know if somebody has been exposed to a virus. Like I could have virus on my outside skin and it's clinically irrelevant, it's epidemiologically irrelevant, but if you detect it, who cares, right? So the problem with the PCR test is it's going to give you a lot of who cares kind of information, right? And that's absolutely not what we wanted. We wanted to know who's sick, how sick, and who have they been in contact with, and can we test them very quickly. Now, Taiwan did this brilliantly. They did it absolutely beautifully. They did test and trace and used it in a very meaningful way. But they designed all their own tests, and they didn't want anything to do with the mRNA vaccines. They just said, we'll do it. But again, if we liked how they were doing it and we saw their success, we should have sent a team over and said, what are you doing? You know, and then tried that. But what we did was we did the worst of the lockdowns to really crush things. We had the worst of the testing that didn't really tell us anything. We bollocksed up all of our clinical and then our death and mortality data. So it was just, the whole thing was just really about as badly as it could be done is how it was done.
Since you brought up Taiwan, it made me think internationally about what is happening in China right now. They are trying to
260 million people locked down right now.
lockdown. Yeah. And now they just reported when I was outside that the U.S. is now telling our diplomats and everybody to get out of Shanghai. So they are trying to get it down to zero, which, if I'm correct, it will never be at zero. It is a virus.
Well, you'll never get, so they've got the Omicron virus right now, and hopefully someday they wake up and go, oh, it's not that bad. It really isn't that bad.
Mild.
It's very mild. You can't get to zero with Omicron. It is so wildly infective. It just swept through this country. It burned out all the other variants. It's probably got a transmissibility that's a lot like, it's close to measles in a daycare without any vaccines in the crew, right? It's really transmissive. And by the way, it totally jumps and evades all of our vaccines. It's as if the vaccine doesn't it's irrelevant.
The Omicron.
The Omicron, yeah.
Okay.
It's like you could be double jabbed and the Omicron would just jump right in you. In fact, there's data to say maybe even more it would get in you easier because of the vaccines. And we have lots of data to suggest that.
Okay. Well,
But China's not going to get to zero. It's not going to happen.
I know, that's why it's shocking and terrible what is happening right there, right now. Even some cities in the U.S. now are bringing back the indoor mask mandates. I think it was somewhere in Pennsylvania today. They just did that.
It's disappointing.
Yeah. So, it's incredible what's happening, and we really appreciate you being here. And with all of your knowledge and the way that you say it so succinctly, you give credit where credit's due to the CDC or the FDA, which makes your points even stronger when you are disagreeing with them.
Thank you.
So really appreciate you being here, and hopefully you'll be with us the rest of the week.
I'll be here tomorrow.
Only tomorrow. Okay, awesome. That's fine. You have other things to do. Okay.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you
night.
so much. Thanks. Good night, and please watch the rest of the week, and we'll see you tomorrow.